Hey, 42 here. I'm sorry to be the one to break this to you, but the reality you think you live in is, in fact, a complete and utter lie. When you walk around out there in the world each day, the ground beneath your feet probably feels reassuringly solid. But I'm afraid it's just an illusion, a comforting falsehood. You see, the center of our planet holds a secret. And if you had the time and resources to dig down deep below the Earth's crust, sooner or later, you'd find it. A colossal cavern lit by a miniature sun that's full of wonders beyond your wildest dreams. Okay, don't worry, this isn't my way of announcing that I've decided to take this channel in a radical new direction. What I've just described aren't my own views, but those of a surprising number of people around the world. People who are of the opinion that the surface of our planet is nothing more than a shell, and that inside this hollow casing, all matter of amazing things lie in wait for us. Exactly what those amazing things might be depends on who you ask. Many Hollow Earth theorists claim there's a Garden of Eden-like tropical paradise down there, and most agree that this strange hidden world is populated, though by who or what is a topic of some debate. Some believe a technologically advanced race have made their home there, in a city called Agatha. Other suggestions include giants, Nazis, and the then lost tribes of Israel. Some people have even gone as far as to claim that the recent rash of UFO sightings reported across the globe may actually have come not from outer space, but from inner space. If all of this is giving you strong flat Earth vibes, you're pretty much on the right lines. But there's a surprising difference between those two outlandish fringe beliefs. To try and put this diplomatically, you won't find too many people with an astrophysics degree who believe the Earth is flat. The idea that Earth is hollow, on the other hand, has been ardently believed by some of the greatest scientists in recent history. Modern flat Earth beliefs mostly stem back to the work of an English writer called Samuel Rowbotham, who believed he'd scientifically proven the flatness of our planet with his famous Bedford level experiment. I did a whole video on that recently, so I won't go into detail here, except to say that when it comes to the sharpness of tools in sheds, so to speak, Rowbotham was a f***ing sledgehammer. As well as believing Earth was flat, he also thought he'd invented a miracle drug capable of curing any disease. This apparent panacea led to the deaths of several people brave or possibly foolish enough to ingest it, including Rowbotham's own son. In a way, you could argue this cure kind of worked. Corpses are impervious to disease, after all. But the fact their loved one no longer had that nasty case of herpes probably wasn't much of a consolation to the devastated relatives of the deceased. Modern Hollow Earth beliefs are usually attributed to an American chap called John Cleve Sims Jr., who was born in the late 18th century. Sims made it his life's mission to spread his Hollow Earth message far and wide, and by the 1820s he'd become so influential that he very nearly convinced the US government to fund an expedition to find the giant entrances to the underworld he believed were located at the poles. But Sims was by no means the first person to claim the Earth was hollow. In fact, almost every civilization in history has had at least some kind of concept of a hidden world beneath our feet, from the Aztecs to the Inuits. Not to mention the fact that something similar crops up in almost every major religion: Hell in Christianity, Sheol in Judaism, Patala in Hinduism, Jahannam in Islam, and Naraka in Buddhism, to name just a few. What I'm trying to say is we humans have actually been kind of obsessed with all things Hollow Earth for a very long time. But about 350 years ago, something strange happened. Hollow Earth theory stepped out of the realm of myth and religion and found itself uncomfortably close to the cutting edge of science. You see, what we think of as a modern Hollow Earth theory wasn't dreamt up by a child-poisoning tool like Samuel Rowbotham. Long before Sims arrived on the scene, the foundations for a Hollow Earth have been laid by some of the most brilliant individuals in the history of our species. Probably the first person to investigate the possibility from a purely scientific perspective was German polymath Athanasius Kircher. If Kircher's name sounds familiar, you might have come across him in my video on the world's most mysterious book, the Voynich manuscript. Admittedly, he didn't cover himself in glory in that one, but Kircher is considered to have been one of the greatest thinkers of his age. There's a reason he's often referred to as a master of 100 arts. Well, 99. Just watch the Voynich video. After having spent some time exploring the crater of Mount Vesuvius in 1638, Kircher came up with a theory that all mountains, rivers, and oceans of the Earth were connected below ground by a giant network of navigable caverns filled with fire and water. Kircher's ideas may not really resemble modern Hollow Earth beliefs, but less than 30 years later, another legendary scientist, Edmund Halley, introduced a theory that's much more familiar to us. Halley was kind of a big deal. He was Britain's second ever royal astronomer, a fellow of the Royal Society, and he was good mates with some random daydreamer by the name of Sir Isaac Newton. He's best known today for being the first person to realise that comets orbit the sun in a predictable way just like the Earth does. But that's just one of a great number of contributions he made to science during his lifetime. In simple terms, Edmund Halley was a genius. A genius who firmly believed the Earth was hollow. According to Halley's hollow Earth model, our planet's crust is actually a shell of rock about 500 miles thick, and inside it are two smaller shells surrounding a solid core, kind of like solar system scale Russian dolls. He believed these shells were surrounded by a breathable atmosphere and were therefore most likely inhabited. He also thought that the northern lights were caused by gas escaping from inside the Earth and interacting with Earth's magnetic field. Several other important scientific thinkers made their own additions to the hollow Earth concept in the centuries after Halley's death, including Scottish physicist Sir John Leslie and first president of Boston University, William Fairfield Warren, amongst others. As the theory gained traction, it began cropping up in popular fiction too. Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth is the most famous example, but there are literally thousands of stories based on the hollow Earth theme. Even legendary Italian womanizer Casanova got involved. Though that man had a one-track mind, so instead of aliens or superhumans, he populated Earth's core with a bunch of randy hermaphroditic dwarfs. If you're interested in reading that one, by the way, it's called Icosamiron. Thought I'd save you the trouble of trying to find it by googling randy hermaphroditic dwarves. Not a good idea. But what does all of this mean for hollow Earth theory? Clearly it's been an important part of culture and religion across the world throughout human history. And some of the greatest geniuses in recent memory have been vocal believers. Is it about time we started taking hollow Earthers a bit more seriously? Yeah, no. Definitely not. The likes of Kircher and Halley were indisputably brilliant men, but they were also people of their time. And much of the science we take for granted today simply didn't exist in the 17th century. The collective knowledge of the human race is a bit like a giant wall. Every generation builds on the work of all those who came before, and the scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers who are dedicated enough to bring original ideas into the world each get to lay a little knowledge brick of their own on top of the rest. The men and women who are pushing the boundaries today likely aren't any more intelligent than previous generations. They simply have the benefit of beginning their journeys much higher up the wall. Halley believed the Earth was hollow because it solved a problem he'd come across in another area of interest, magnetism. At the end of the 17th century, he set off on a year-long voyage of the Atlantic Ocean to study and map the Earth's magnetic field. The voyage was a huge success, but Halley had expected Earth's magnetic field to be constant and unmoving. A year of taking thousands of compass readings all over the Atlantic showed him that wasn't the case. Hollow Earth theory was his attempt to make sense of experimental results he didn't understand. In other words, it was a hypothesis. If Earth's magnetic field was fluctuating, Halley reasoned that something must be interfering with it. Competing magnetic fields from large objects inside the Earth? Perhaps. Of course, his hypothesis was completely wrong, but he arrived at it through experimental observation and logical reasoning. In other words, he was just a scientist doing science. The fact is, pretty much every brilliant scientist that's ever lived has believed some weird and wonderful things that would sound ridiculous today. Charles Darwin had no idea how genetic inheritance actually worked, despite it being a fundamental part of his theory of evolution. And physicist Lord Kelvin was convinced he'd calculated the exact age of the Earth, when, in actual fact, he was off by about 4.4 billion years. No doubt the leading scientists of the current generation will be shown to have made a few major blunders of their own in the not-too-distant future. And Hollow Earth theory was, undeniably, a blunder. These days, there's plenty of evidence that proves, beyond doubt, that our planet isn't hollow. The fact that we all stick to it through gravity, for one thing. A hollow Earth, like the one Sims envisaged, would have less than 1% of the mass of a solid sphere, meaning gravity at the surface would be a fraction of what we actually experience. Not to mention the fact that a planet-sized shell of rock 500 miles thick would simply collapse under its own weight. Scientists have determined the composition of the planet by measuring things like Earth's gravity, magnetic field, and the progress of seismic waves as they travel through the ground deep beneath our feet. That's how we know the planet is made up of three main layers: the crust, the mantle, and the core. None of which would make a comfortable home for a giant or a Nazi. There really is no room for ambiguity here, but there is one small problem with all of these pieces of evidence. They're all a little bit esoteric, making them fairly easy to dismiss by anyone uninterested in taking the time to understand them. Ultimately, the only surefire way to make a hollow earther believe the center of our planet is solid would be to dig a giant hole and send them down there. Of course, they wouldn't get all that far before the intense heat would literally boil them alive. But hey, sometimes the truth hurts. Thanks for watching.